Hello and welcome back to the One Take Show podcast. In this episode, we are in conversation with an incredible guest. Our guest today is Mr. Nandan Kamath. Sir is the principal lawyer at LawNK. He's the co-founder of Sports and Society Accelerator. He's the trustee of GoSports Foundation. And in this episode, we talk about this intermingling of sports and law. We talk about the impact of sports in Sir's life. We talk about his Rhodes experience. We talk about this entire industry where law and sports come together. We talk about up and coming trends like NFTs and how that impacts the sports industry in totality, everything. So this is one of the finest episodes of the One Take Show, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it, which if you will, please make sure to like, share, subscribe to the channel. If you have any suggestions or feedbacks, write them down in the comment section. I would love to read them. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's start with the podcast.
You want something, go get it. Period.
Good morning. Hello, sir. Welcome to the One Take Show. I am truly grateful to have this glorious opportunity to be able to speak with you, to sit down with you. As a law student who's been exploring all the various fields in law, who's been trying to speak with all the experts who've carved a niche, who've created a pathway, who've really inspired so many people, I am truly grateful to have this opportunity to speak with you, because I think not just in sports law, but also to find your own personality in this legal field, to create such an example for everyone to follow. I think everyone who's going to watch this episode is going to learn so much, is going to draw so much inspiration from experience. Thank you so much for taking time out from your very busy schedule and sitting down with me for this conversation.
And thank you, Kaustubh, and congratulations on all the work you've done to get to here. It's good to see the commitment to learning and growing yourself.
Thank you so much, sir. So before we begin with the conversation, I was actually researching a little bit for this episode, and I found out a couple of conversations you've had on other podcasts. And I think this would be a perfect place for us to start. You said that even today as an advocate, you still like to think like a sportsman. And I think this question sort of sets a mood for this entire episode, because there is so much I would like to talk about in this field. But when you say that you need to think like a sportsman, what is that preliminary understanding that you have, and how do you convey it to someone like us who is still sort of trying to build an understanding as to how we can approach either the legal field or otherwise any industry which we are going to engage ourselves professionally?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. In just as background, so I was an athlete before I was anything else. So I think in many cases, all of us are, as young people, playing games, playing sports is one of the first things we do in an organized manner. And for me, that became just such a strong passion as I was growing up that it became very much who I was. So I was a sports person first and everything else later. And in many ways, the lessons from sport really pervaded into the way I looked at my career, but more my life in general, which is essentially that there are certain targets, and those targets are not always in your control, but there are systematic ways in which one can go about trying to achieve these various targets. And what at the end of the day, what's a sport? It's a challenge laid out before you. There are some rules. You need to understand the challenge, understand the rules, and then put in the work that it takes to get there. So gradually increasing your chances that you can get to targets and achieve certain goals. And in many ways, it's a form of like gamification of life, but not relative to others. It's really driving that internal competition within yourself. You can be extremely competitive internally and approach everything like a sports person would. Like I said, breaking it down into understanding, putting in the work, and then responding to the challenge laid before you. And it's an attitude to life. It's not necessarily a way of doing things, but just recognizing that something may seem impossible, but the only way to get to it is to begin and to engage and to improve and to grow and to learn. So I would say it's an attitude rather than an approach to life, and it's helped me in reasonably good stead so far. So not letting it go.
Definitely, sir. I think from your experience and for all the glorious things that you've accomplished, as a law student, it might sound really naive for me to even list them down or try to ask you questions about them. But for us, it's like a dream gold standard, something that we would definitely love to achieve if we become hyper successful with our career. But as you said, like you've had a change. You were a sportsman first. You had traded your, like I've read your interview with Superlaw as well. You traded your dream of becoming a professional cricketer. And by chance, as you said, that you ended up with law and then you started with NLSIU. I think this change must have been very glorious for you as well, especially when you further in your course of life, you also go with Rhodes Rhodes as an application, which historically has also given a lot of importance to students who have participated in sports, who've shown some great caliber with sports activities as a part of their growth. So how do you think that has shaped you, especially in law school? Was your law school any different from any other academic student who's been studying in law school, either for the purposes of recruitment or any other such purposes? Or was it that it was inclined towards that direction where sports somehow complemented your choices in law school, and then you ended up with Rhodes as an application process?
So I almost applied to law school by chance because one of my friends was doing the exam, and I said, let me do it as well. So I was, as a youngster, like not just sport, but I liked any sort of challenge. So word games, puzzles, even quizzes. So this exam was set up in such a way that it was almost like a puzzle quiz. There was general knowledge, there was logic, there was some maths, which I was reasonably good at. So I actually picked it up more like a test of myself and just to enjoy the exam. And then I happened to get through, which was a little surprising to me given that I hadn't really prepared much. But that was a very significant decision-making point of whether to continue playing sport, which I was doing quite well at, or to go down the law school path. And I was very fortunate that my parents left that choice to me. But having made that choice, I just felt I had to double down on the academic opportunity because you're letting go of something that you have enjoyed and are good at. And then you need to make that other choice count. So that was that attitude of, okay, I'm not going down this path. This is another path. Now let's play it the same way. Like if you want to play cricket for India, you have to put everything into it. And if I'm not going down that path, can I use the same aptitudes and attitudes? Maybe I don't have the same academic opportunities yet, or the training that maybe someone who hadn't played sport had, but I did have, in some sense, inherent skills and approaches. And I really brought that to the law school, but I really took to it as like a duck takes to water. So the first semester or two, I wasn't entirely sure. There were people from all over the country, lots of new ideas I'd never really thought about. But as I settled in and just understood what the opportunity was, it fascinated me because it was really a window into understanding the world. I love systems thinking, looking at problems, seeing how institutionally one can respond to problems, organizing large amounts of data and making sense of them. And this was just such a fabulous opportunity for all of those things. I didn't know that beforehand, but I think when you find where you're meant to be, I think that comes very clearly to you. You get the feedback that you need. So sort of towards the end of the first year and then all through the other years, I really enjoyed law school. I didn't do much sports law in that sense. So I just continued playing some sport for the university. We even won an inter-university match, which was a big deal. At that point, we were just a small law school playing against universities with tens of thousands of students. So very little sporting connection, but I was genuinely interested in technology, the internet. So I did a little work on internet and the law. But then that one thing led to another. Obviously, I got the Rhodes Scholarship, and having played cricket must have certainly helped in that application. Went back to Oxford, played some more cricket there, and then studied for a bit, worked for a bit, and really the journey back to sport happened in 2006-07 when I moved back to India after having practiced in the US for 3 years. So I got my B.C.L and M.Sc from Oxford, and then I did an LL.M at Harvard Law School before I practiced at a wonderful law firm in California called Davis, Polk and Wardwell. Again, there I didn't do much, or for that matter, anything to do with sport. It was technology, corporate law, capital markets, mergers and acquisitions. But I was very determined at that stage to come back, and I said I'd give myself 3 years of foreign education, 3 years of work. So I'd set that out pretty early. And when I came back in 2006 and 7, sort of, I think the interest had, I realized that this was a love that was not going away. And if there was an opportunity to combine my profession with the thing I loved, I wanted to jump into it and figure out whether that was possible. So that's where, in some sense, sport reconnected. I would say my original self reconnected with my creative self of sorts.
Right, sir. I think I would definitely jump on that. I would love to know about what was your inspiration behind, let's say, having a cross-jurisdictional experience does not, like, as so far as I've spoken to so many people, it's not a natural choice for everyone to come back to India and start their own law firm. It's usually working with other law firms or working with other organizations or finding their own
workspaces in that sense. But before I do that, I think I definitely have to ask you this, because you've had possibly one of the most successful careers with law school, specifically with respect to law school, and then finding opportunities with Oxford and then Harvard as well. Uh, if, if you look back, is there a particular strategy that you would have wanted to know at that point of time in order to navigate your way through law school? Like if today you could go back and advise yourself about something uh, with the way you've approached law schools, would there be any such advice?
I mean, it comes from a little bit of survivorship bias because I managed to do the things that at that point was relevant to me. And I looked at it from a very sort of next step, next step, next step. So I didn't have this grand plan. And I encourage people not to have too grand a plan and be so focused on this is the only thing I want, this is the only place I want to work, or this is the only place I want to study. It's a little bit like working to the next goal, and that's the way I worked through law school. At the end of law school, I knew I wanted to apply for the Rhodes. I got through that. When I finished Rhodes, I knew I wanted to study for a year in the US. I approached that with all my gusto. So in many ways, again, analogy to cricket. As a junior cricketer, you're playing fast bowling, and you may be playing bowlers who are bowling at whatever 110 kilometers an hour, 120. Can you take a young under 15, under 16? You can take Tendulkar as an exception, but can you put them against a fast bowler? No, because a test bowler, right? They're bowling at 140, 150 kilometers an hour. The difference is so significant. But what bridges the gap, in some sense, for a young cricketer who moves to senior levels is iterative growth and learning. So you're from 110, you're playing a bowler who's 120, challenging yourself. So you're getting used to the levels one stage at a time. And in some sense, that is the approach to life, right? In some sense, moving from the 110 capable batsman to the 120 capable batsman. So the way I looked at my 20s very much was opening up and creating opportunities for myself in my life. As many as I could create, that was in some sense the goal, but very sort of short-term targets, but the opportunity creation was the broader goal. And from there, it was about sort of in the 30s, it was about accessing some of those goals and experimenting, exploring a little bit. And that was the process of just understanding who I am, what are the things that truly motivate me. Because early on, you're product of the opportunities that are presented to you. But then you end up becoming the product of the opportunities you choose to use. And that sort of going wide, opening up opportunities, which of course my education did, and so did my work experience. But then I just felt for my own sake to access those opportunities and try and use the things that had opened up for me. And I felt most strongly that I had a contribution to make back in India, and that this would be the place where I would have the most opportunities for growth, exploration, and trying different things. So that's what brought me back. And so sort of those 30s were really a period in which I had a chance to start a law firm, start a non-profit, work on policy, multiple different things. And the big thing for me there is I did not label myself as just one thing. I was not a lawyer. I was not a non-profit person. I was just who I was, and I was on a exploration which actually was not bounded either by myself or by anyone else.
I mean, that's very fascinating, because that slightly goes against most of the advice that I've received. That I mean, sure, like once you make you have a background that is so rich. I'm sure like choices like these are very easy to make in order to identify yourself as someone who can, number one, be a lawyer, can also work for nonprofit and work in different areas. But the other kind of advices that I've received, and I would like you to comment on this as well, is that the moment you're out of law school, it's advised that you start finding one specialization so that people start understanding or accepting your brand as an advocate or as a lawyer. Would you say it's not an advisable technique or a strategy for a law student, especially in the initial years of his industry experience?
See, I don't think I'm in a position to give anyone advice. I mean, I'm an expert on myself. I'm not an expert on other people's journeys. I mean, I was a product of my upbringing, my own privilege. And this is the way I played it in many ways. I mean, I sought, not that I didn't seek other people's advice. And I got advice very early on from someone who just told me, don't look at specialization, just be good at what you're doing first. And in some sense, specialization will come to you. So that advice was reasonably good. So looked at the sort of the broader skills of being a lawyer, drafting, attention to detail, client management, and those are transportable to anything, right? So before you're a specialist, can you build the core toolkit? And that toolkit is what I talked about, is opening up opportunities. When you start having transferable skills, what do those do? Those open up chances for you to express them in different ways, perhaps in areas of interest that interest you more than an employer will give. So, I mean, there are various bits of advice. I don't necessarily feel it's appropriate to put yourself in someone else's shoes, because everyone's circumstances are quite different. And I can just talk about my own experience and how I approached the opportunity sets that I was presented, obviously knowing that there was a lot of privilege involved in that.
Right, so wonderful. And I think this is the perfect time when I ask you about your experience with LawNK, because LawNK is one of the flag bearers of technology law, of sports law, of IPL law, of disputes, and especially creating its own name and space, and has completely shaken the entire industry. Everyone knows about LawNK, everyone is following in LawNK. Uh, what is your experience about running a boutique law firm which specifically targets areas, especially when it comes down to something like sports law, where not a lot of lawyers are either talking about, especially in law school. Like my understanding, even if it is limited to law school, not everyone here is talking about sports law as an area where they would want to work in. Most of us are either working in corporates, are working in disputes, majorly studying arbitration or the such aligned subjects. But when it comes to working or creating a niche in an industry which is either new or isolated in some sense, what is your experience with that kind of a law firm and your engagement with that kind of an industry?
No, I think it's a good question. It's not like I went out saying I'm going to set up this law firm and this is what it's going to do. I think you describe it quite generously. It's perhaps much smaller and much more sort of localized than you describe it as. But my journey, it's more, I'd say my clients made the law firm rather than me intending that it was going to be a firm that did X, Y, and Z. So I had come back from the US, was doing a bunch of different things. And then I got lots of from the community that I used to play in, and other people in sport, lots of little queries. It was very early on in the realm of anyone having legal questions in sport. There weren't that many people working in sport. There were a handful. But in many ways, I found my own niche in response to demand that was made on me. And it was around the same time that the IPL also came. And so legal issues became more interesting, more complex, and someone of my skill had something to add on the professional side. So LawNK happened rather than was planned or intended, and it's still small, and it's been grown very, very organically and very, very specifically to be a sustainable firm that looks at very, very specialized areas. And I think that has helped significantly because we're able to offer a wide range of things, but to a very specialized set of industries. The discovery problem goes away, and so does the sort of, in some sense, competition problem. So when you think of a few different areas of practice like sports, gaming, technology, and anything new and cutting edge, I think we would certainly come up in the mix for consideration at least. And that certainly helps to be, I would say, a broad generalist rather than a specialist. So it is not that we do only one thing, but we can do a lot of things very well for a sort of a small basket of industries. So it has helped to be clearer, it helps to go deeper, but not to go so wide as that you're competing with the whole world, right? I think that's the risk small firms which work in broad areas actually run the risk of. So I think the ability to distinguish yourself and to be found and to signal very clearly what you're good at is possible in a small firm like this with very clear specializations.
Right. So I think this is possibly one of the most unique descriptions of the practice areas. For example, having a wide array of specializations or generalized approach towards specializations from a bunch of industries that you're working with. If they're like you have a very strong body of juniors working for you, some of the finest advocates working for you. If there is a junior tomorrow who wishes to join your firm, who wishes to work for you, in order to particularly either follow your path or follow the principle with which LawNK functions, what are those basic core principles that you would expect a junior to come with, to join your chamber with, or to have that kind of an attitude?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because we ask ourselves that of what is the DNA of someone who's successful at our firm. And it's very strongly the sort of what I would say an attitude to learning and what is commonly called growth mindset. I know there are a lot of self-help books which talk about it, but the recognition that you're in there to expand your set of skills, and that your eyes and ears and all your senses are open to absorbing learning from doing. So that's the advantage in some sense of a small firm, is how quickly you jump into doing client related work, and the opportunity to, it's not a sink or swim atmosphere, but it's a dive in and we'll help you swim type of atmosphere you can create in a smaller firm. So the fearlessness, but also the attitude to I'll learn, I'm going to sort of help myself learn, and I'm going to access the opportunities that are there for my personal growth. And I think all the rest is secondary. We don't expect someone to have written 10 books and 50 articles. We have a very diverse set of young people, and it's obviously aptitude is important, and we do a few sort of assessments and tests, but it is so significantly attitudinal that it's this combination of aptitude and attitude that attracts us to a certain bunch of people. And we have been extremely fortunate with the type of lawyer that we've been able to access and who feels like they have a career here. So
Right, wonderful, sir. And I'm curious, do you also transport this kind of a DNA, or so this kind of an understanding to your engagements with other organizations as well? So, for example, I was reading up a little bit on Sports and Society Accelerator and GoSports, and I would love to know what is your engagement with. I'm sure, like, I know that you're a co-founder of one of these organizations, and I would love to know what is the principle behind these organizations and what kind of engagement do you have with these organizations? What is the purpose that you seek to fulfill with these organizations?
yeah, so I think I learned quite early on that the areas you may be good at, may not necessarily be hugely interested in, but the areas you're interested in, you may not necessarily be good at. So actually, you might need to find other people to execute visions that you have and to build a type of institution or organization that you feel is needed in a particular social and economic milieu. So GoSports was something I started quite early on alongside LawNK with a few other people. It's a non-profit which works with young athletes, so Olympic and Paralympic athletes, and taking them through the pathways, both financial as well as career management. It started literally in the same office with sort of, in some sense, cross-subsidized grants. We used to earn some money from law fees and put it into building this organization, getting friends, family to donate. But now it has grown into a very significant presence where about 150 athletes are supported through very large CSR driven programs and with a full professional team, and has really moved the needle on various different aspects of sports that had never been supported, para sports, a multitude of sports which no one had ever represented India at the Olympics. So really changing the narrative of what is possible for an Indian athlete. I was quite institutionally and operationally involved through the many years, but now it's found its own feet and was ready to fly on its own. So I'm very much in the governance of it. We have a wonderful CEO and a management team that takes care of it. So my role essentially became much more on governance, guidance, policy in that organization. But from that also grew the dream of trying to build more of these, or rather to enable other people to build more of these, in which the germ of the idea of the Sports and Society Accelerator came. So while GoSports was looking at creating these role models in sports that had never been accessed before, I came to the realization that sport is so much more than medals and so much more than just about government delivering programs. Really working towards getting more people involved with the sports movement in making decisions, but also social enterprise, people trying to use sport for purposes beyond medals. So medals are important, but can we make the medals count? Where sport is used for inclusion, sport is used in many different ways, even in restorative justice, reformative justice. So many different places where sport can be used as an instrument. So Sports and Society Accelerator has just been formed a couple of months ago, and we're just rolling out programs which are sort of policy, working with government to build policy for more inclusive sports participation as well as sports sort of creation, but also building out programs where more organizations, let me say the next 50 or 100 GoSports can be created by other people, but with our guidance, with our support, and a little bit of push that sometimes that's all which these organizations need. So in some sense, it's again an expanding and the creation of more opportunities. The belief that all of us have the capability to bring certain forms of change we would like to see, and that very often all it requires is a little bit of support at the right time that can have, in some sense, leapfrogging impact in the way I've seen one or two organizations I've been involved in change significant areas and change both mindsets but also behaviors.
Right, sir, absolutely. And I think when I was researching about this, I've seen that there is a collaboration with the most prestigious institutions, governmental institutions as well across the country. And I see that there is a very significant flow of work that is happening from this organization. On that note, I would like to also bring this conversation from a little legal perspective, because I would love to know your opinion about the legal practice of sports law. Because every time we talk about sports and we want to contribute either as lawyers or perhaps not as lawyers as well, but there is always a concern that I, as a law student, would have is what is my engagement with sports, or what could be my engagement with sports, or what is my engagement as a lawyer with sports. So, do you have an overall opinion about the legal practice that surrounds sports law per se, or the industry of sports per se, and what has been your experience about it?
See, I think at each stage in sports ecosystems development, where different people will play significant roles, and like someone has to essentially helm that from the sports law perspective. And what you have seen over the last 10, 15 years is sports development, the growth of non-profits, and sports business, the growth of the IPL. But in many ways, the IPL stands alone. But where did lawyers have the opportunity? The lawyers had the lawyers who were more transactional in nature had the opportunity to get involved. So contracts, sponsorships, broadcast agreements, other things like that. And as the ecosystem matures, there will be more chances, as we've seen more recently, on disputes. So when you have a maturing and growing ecosystem, both transactional law as well as disputes law meet sports industry, and the broader world of sport. So I don't think anyone is actually kept out of the world of sport. It is not a technical field. What you do need is a sensitivity and understanding. There are some specific rules which you need to go down, but that is the case with almost any other field or profession, right? You can't do oil and natural gas law without understanding that industry and its own specific milieu, rules, ecosystem. Similarly, it's really about practicing transactional law or disputes law with an attitude of an understanding of that industry, what makes it specific and unique, and bringing that to bear in the work that you do. So in the way that you would draft a contract, understand risk, understand distribution of, or rather the sharing of risk between parties, what are the unexpecteds in a contract, what is force majeure, or the way you would look at it and in a dispute of assessing damages, assessing sort of what types of remedies you're seeking. It may always help to understand the sports industry. I don't think anyone is alienated from it. So if there's, what I tell young people who ask me, I want to be a sports lawyer, is that anyone can be. What you need to do is sharpen your skills, build the toolkit of knowledge that is required to be able to specialize, and opportunities will come to you. You may work at a large firm, you may work at a small firm. If you're in the mix and you're working with sports, you're volunteering, you're writing, one time or another, there's going to be something that falls in your lap. Are you ready to capture it? Or you say, no, I don't know anything about this, and you pass it on to someone else. So if you have an interest, whatever that might be in sport or anything else, I think it's about constantly sharpening it. And like I said, just playing that next innings to get better at that field. And sometimes luck is all that it requires, right? As a matter of fortune, something might fall into your lap. And in many cases, that has been the case with me as well. So the type of sports work that came to me was not something I'd planned, I desired, but it's not something I went after. It in some sense came to me when I was ready, and I was ready to sort of capture it and to do the work quite well.
Right, sir. So that's wonderfully accurate, because I would love to catch you on one of the points that you said, that when young lawyers ask you that we want to become sports lawyers, and I think to some extent you've already answered this question, but for the clarity of everyone who's watching or listening to this podcast, you said that there are certain set of tools, toolkits, so there are certain set of tools that one needs to master, or one needs to study or work upon in order to be a good, proper candidate to enter into the sports law industry. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on what are those toolkits? For example, I understand that you said that drafting is something that is important, a contractual understanding of how to go about that commercial awareness is important. But apart from that, is there anything else, maybe legislation wise? Because I understand that sports law does not have any central such as legislation. So we can't say, like, for example, disputes, you need to have a mastery over arbitration, something of that sort. But is there any such certain set of rules, regulations, or skill set that we need to master in order to be good at sports law or to find a niche quicker in sports law?
I think the big one is really understanding the various parties and their interests. But also, I mean, while there might not be legislation, there is the National Sports Code. It's understanding how governance works, what are the unique bits within the world of sport, the relationship between the state and federations, recognition and de-recognition of federations. But more than that, just understanding the whole ecosystem of sports business as well as sports governance. So, like you said, the generic skills are in drafting, client management, arguing if you're litigating. All of those are skills which will be transported anywhere. But where many people could spend a little bit more effort is on understanding parties, their interests, their motivations, and the balances that pervade any industry, right? So you can't win 100%. There's someone else who's also there trying to aim for the same resources. So what are the fine balances within an ecosystem which is multi-stakeholder? And sport is a wonderful multi-stakeholder ecosystem where there are so many different parties involved. Federations, athletes, sponsors, broadcasters, media. So all of these are in one form of balance. And young people can put in some effort to understand what is the entity, what is their interest in sport, and how are they trying to take their interests away while also contributing to sport. And that is a valuable sort of, I'd say, toolkit to have, is to, when you're drafting, know why you're drafting from a certain position, because you know what your party's interest is. If you're litigating, you know why this person is coming to this litigation, what it means to them. And I'm not saying it purely from that transactional perspective, but what does it mean in the broader ecosystem, the position they hold and the position they want to hold in the longer run. So that is certainly an area worth following the sports news, following debates on governance in sport, reading. There's lots of international case law that comes up from CAS. Much of it will be related to football, and there's not that much that relates in India. I mean, there is emerging football jurisprudence here. It's a little difficult being in an Indian milieu and wanting to really understand sports law very in the pure sort of international sports law sense. But I think you have to find your niches. Industries are so specific that the Indian sports industry might work very differently from a European or American one. So understanding those little curiosities, having sort of the desire to understand the minor details that become major details in transactions or in disputes.
Right, sir. Wonderful. I think this is very important, because I've had a conversation with another lawyer who's practicing with sports law in Spain, and she told me about how industry specific the requirements are, especially when it comes down to, and how these industry specific requirements change the moment you move, let's say, from Spain to another country. And while she was working for UEFA, there were different requirements, different kind of transactional deals, there are different roles that advocates had to play. And I think in India as well, so long as this industry is concerned, it's growing very dynamically, and there are different requirements that keep surfacing. But I would also like to bring this conversation to a wonderful piece that I've read that is authored by you, which is a sort of an intersection of sports law as well as technology law. If I'm not wrong, I think it was Dinesh Karthik who came up with the first NFT project and became sort of a very transformational point of view for Indian sports stepping into blockchain, even though there's not a lot of clarity with respect to how our government is responding to either NFTs or blockchain. But this is a monumental step in that direction. You've written about it. I would love to know your opinion as to how NFTs, non-fungible tokens, or any such blockchain technology finds itself assembling with whatever in sports we have in our country.
Yeah, so I think it's still very early stages. People are still getting used to what is this digital asset? How do we even think about it? Right now, it's seen as, in some sense, a new commercial revenue stream. While that is the case right now, I think as NFTs find their way, there are many very, very interesting applications. I would say it helps bring fans much closer to the action. And there's a lot to be done to enable that, but to also maintain the balance and the governance balance that intermediaries also bring. So I think there can be risks with bringing fans directly in touch with athletes. And there is a very significant role that governance also plays in maintaining appropriate distance, appropriate procedures. So NFTs have to be used with care and responsibility because you're actually disintermediating the governor. So I think the really interesting things will be as you get fan and athlete closer together. Can NFTs be embedded with some of the sort of the governance principles and values? To me, that is a very interesting exploration that is going to come up. Right now, we're still dealing with very nascent issues, the IP issues that come up. Do I need the permission of the person whose NFT, whose photograph is embedded, the personality rights, publicity rights? So legally, we're still dealing with very basic issues, how it's going to be taxed, various different things. But to me, the really interesting iterations are in this disintermediation of governance and what we're going to replace it with. So it essentially becomes architecture which is replacing law, norms, governance. And to me, there's some fascinating things that are going to happen in terms of fan-driven sports decision making. And right now, NFTs have been converted into fan tokens, and eventually, fan tokens could be converted into sort of distributed organizations which are actually governing sport themselves. So you could see a world 10, 15 years from now where there are no federations. People just organize themselves, organize events, and are in control of the events that they are watching. So there's fascinating, I think, futures for technologies like this. It's really very much at the intersection of my interests, which are in technology, sports, governance, and systems. So I'm actually quite eagerly looking forward to how this all plays out. Still educating myself. I can't say I'm an expert in this, and for that matter, I'm not sure anyone can. So.
Right, sir, absolutely. Because, and you're right, there is so much potential in this area of discovery. There is so much research that can be done. Because I remember, like any other law student who's trying to understand these blockchain technologies or NFTs, I was just reading about it, and then suddenly, about last year end, Lionel Messi dropped his NFT project, and suddenly it all became about, oh my God, these superstars can also have their NFT minted projects. And then it all became like all these athletes, Floyd Mayweather, to other all these glorious stars across the world started minting their NFT projects. And suddenly it came back to India, where we have the Indian players also participating in NFT projects. And so it becomes a very interesting conversation as to how does this process actually evolve? Like, does this give all the more opportunities to, let's say, the gamers who are anyway working with technology, and then also are provided with incentivization in the form of NFT minting projects? So definitely something that I would love to research more upon. And I think reading upon the work that you have used, knowing that there are industry leaders working eagerly, looking forward towards solutions, questions, and answers to these areas, definitely very, very interesting for all of us to read up upon.
And
I
because
won't. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I just want to add here. So this for young people, right? So in the same way that I approach sports law, this also presents opportunities because there's nobody who knows this field so far ahead of you. There are no significant gaps. So a young lawyer just getting out of law school, still in law school, if you start studying this seriously, you can be so far ahead of the game because established people may not understand it in the same way you do as a user, as someone acquainted, sort of many digital natives. You've been brought up in the age of the internet. So use those advantages. Not everyone is not all fields already have experts with sort of stakes in the ground. It's an opportunity as much as it's a challenge. So I would certainly set that up as a challenge for young lawyers to try and be better than anyone else, because you can be better than other people who are sort of less apt at being able to catch up or to even understand what is going on in this world.
Right. So I think possibly this is the only time the lawyers have a generational gap with respect to the younger lawyers who are entering into this field. But this was going to be my next question with you, and possibly my last one as well. I understand I've taken a lot of your time, but if you are to close this conversation, I would ask you, is there any advice for all the law students who are watching you, following you, and not just on this episode, through your work, who want to follow your footsteps, who idolize you and your work? Do you have any opinion? Do you have any experience? Do you have any advice for those law students as to how can they also find success with respect to their approach towards law school?
Yeah, no, I think
towards legal education, legal career in general. I apologize.
no, like I said, Kaustubh, I'm not one for doling out advice because, like I said, each person's circumstances are so different. I can only say that sort of my quest has been authenticity and exploration, and in some sense, feeding my curiosity. So I'm very curious about the world, but I'm also curious about myself. So allowing these two to find themselves, right? So using the world to satisfy your curiosities and trying to make sense of the world, which is the quest all of us are on. And can you constantly feed it? So the way I approached my, like I said, my 20s was about opening up opportunities, 30s were about accessing them. But then the 40s have been really about calming myself down and saying, okay, this is what I'm good at, and let me focus and be specialized but wide. So now spread my skills across multiple different things. So in many ways, I'm a reason, perhaps unique freelancer where I'm a lawyer half of the day, maybe a non-profit manager third of the day, doing policy another bit of the day, and I enjoy that because in many ways I feel like I've created that life and built a life that I enjoy and I'm excited about. And that has changed also. There are phases to careers. So not looking at it as a unitary road where you're going down and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. I've just looked at life as, like I said, what's the next bit of the journey? How do I feel about it now? And how do I open up the opportunities that I do want to access next and explore, figure out, does this work for me? Does it not? And move on to the next thing and really find, like I said, keep feeding my curiosity and exploring new realms, exploring new ideas, working with new people is exciting. But also in phases, different things begin to excite you. It begins to excite you to see young people who have worked with you to grow and take on leadership positions. So your metric of success may also change, and that has been the case with me. So just seeing all the organizations that we started 15 years ago, different people take up leadership, and I really enjoy becoming redundant in a lot of these organizations because it means that someone else has really risen and very often is doing things better than I could have done them. And it, in some sense, frees me to do something else and to explore somewhere else. So I think that is what my life's been like. I don't know what the future holds. I'll just be looking for the sort of the next new challenge, which is the Sports and Society Accelerator. Not leaving any of the others behind, but knowing my space, but also keeping sort of the door open to new opportunities, new experiences, and this, I would say, this attitude of exploration and growth.
Right. So wonderful. I think uh, these are possibly the words that any law student would love to live by. And this happens to be one of the finest conversations that I've had on this podcast. I'm really excited to bring this episode to anyone who is going to listen to this, watch this episode, because for the first time, possibly, that I've discussed a topic that was in itself unique, but also to bring that kind of a passion and that kind of an understanding from an expert in the field. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I'm really, really grateful to have you on the podcast, to have this conversation, to be able to share this in person as well, and also with all the other people who are going to watch this episode. Thank you so much for taking time off your very, very busy schedule. Thank you so much for awarding me this opportunity. And thank you so much for sitting down with me. I had a wonderful time speaking with you. I hope you had a good time too.
Thank you, Kaustubh. Keep up your good work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.